Okay, we're live. Welcome to Dive into Worldbuilding. Today we are talking about portraying children and I don't know. I think this is actually an important topic because children are more complicated than people often give them credit for. But not only are they complex and varying, they vary incredibly widely. Even brothers and sisters can be incredibly different from one another. So incredibly different. That, you know, I mean, and in terms of, I think that one of the problems that I sometimes see in fiction where featuring children is a sort of standardized set of expectations of developmental milestones. And those are often wrong. And also, of course, standardized anything is a problem when it comes to the portrayal of particular individuals. So, yeah, so, I mean, we do get what we talked about in the precociousness hangout a few weeks ago, which is, you know, child genius, which, yeah. Okay, okay, and it has its own issues, and go listen to that hangout if you want to know what some of them are, right? But not all kids are child geniuses, and honestly, if you're going to be portraying children, you should think of them as individual characters and know things about them, like, you know, as if they were people who were actual characters.
They are my actual characters.
Well, right?
90% of the time.
I mean, there are a couple of things that I notice, and one is that you do tend to get these child geniuses, but the other thing that you tend to get is overly simplified children, because children have very complex inner lives, and they are often capable of doing pretty amazing things. And in fact, I'm hoping that at some point in the hour we can actually get into how cultural expectations across the world vary for children, because kids in different cultures are expected to be able to do different things. You know, so there's so much here that it's hard to know where to start. But just as an example, one of my favorite characters from my novella, which I just sold, yay, is a 2-year-old. And I decided that I wanted to make her a 2-year-old kind of like I remember my kids being. So having kids is helpful for realism in portrayals. But, you know, obviously it's not necessary. Still, if you don't happen to have children, it's good to go out and research them as you might research any other topic, just so that you're not imagining things about yourself when you were young, which you may not remember with incredible accuracy, and that sort of thing. So don't be afraid to do research on children. But the 2-year-old, whom I very much enjoy, I decided that she was in the 2-word stage. And the 2-word stage is a stage of first language acquisition. It follows the 1-word stage. So, you know, that's like a whole semester's worth of course is language acquisition. But basically, anything that I wanted this 2-year-old character to say, she had to be able to say in 2 words. But that doesn't mean she can't say complicated things. And it doesn't mean that she can't say 2 words and then think about it and say 2 more words, right? It's just that she has no full-fledged concept of a sentence yet, and so that's not an option. And so, yeah, so anyway, so having her having her in the story was a lot of fun and an interesting challenge. And having her communicate with her much more sophisticated mom was always very interesting because I was having to go, okay, how do I say this in 2 words? Right? Yeah.
I'm fascinated because depending on how old your 2-year-old was, how many months along that was, your kid is actually a little late. Usually 2 years old is like right where 2 words ends, but
and that's another thing that
as I said, there's a lot of variation, and I was like,
there is.
This is probably a little late for the 2-word stage, exactly. But at the same
what
time,
a great conceit.
Well, I think it's fair for me to have her there. I have in fact known kids personally who were 3 or 4 and still in the 2-word stage. So
sure,
so I was like, well, and it was actually, to be honest, it was an authorial choice moment, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Because I was like, well, I could try to make her sound like a little baby with sentences.
Yeah.
And that might actually be more difficult because of the fact that there would be fewer constraints.
Yeah.
And so, in a way, I wanted her to be at an earlier stage of language development because I felt that would be to portray accurately than trying to go back and remember how exactly my kids would compose sentences when they were 3, or when they had just gotten past that and started making real sentences. So yeah, it was a choice. And
oh no, I totally support the choice. It's just for anybody listening who wants to go,
no, I think
2
it's
and
very
a half,
useful to point out.
Yeah, there is there is quite a range, and you can do research on that without actually bothering anybody else's children on what the range is. But the other thing to remember is that even within a family, that's one of the things that can vary.
Yes.
Younger children, if there are multiple children in a family, the younger children might, all else being equal, tend to pick up speech faster.
Or more slowly.
Or more slowly.
I've seen both extremes where the younger child allows the older sibling to just speak for them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And stays gestural. And you end up with an older child who's the interpreter.
And with my kids, the older child just was bored with the younger child and was encouraging. And so like my daughter was getting my son to walk sooner, to talk sooner, just like pulling him along.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it happens with both ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Family dynamics, I guess, have a lot to do with it.
I knew a kid who was 4 and who barely spoke because his sister was his interpreter.
Right.
Well, off she went to full-time school.
Uh-huh.
And that little boy was talking in full sentences within 3 weeks.
Yeah.
Right.
And then there's the only child, a friend of mine who, as her mom recalls it, didn't say a word until she was 3 and then came out in full sentences because she wanted to make sure she got it right.
Yeah.
She's relaxed since then. She's a little less tense about getting things right the first time. But yeah, I mean, my baby sister learned to read younger than either myself or our other sister because we got bored with reading to her. So she had to learn to read to herself. So family dynamics will have a lot to do with it. But yeah, within a family, picking up how fast you pick up things is going to vary. And physical differences. You can't always look at kids and say, oh, you must be so-and-so's sibling. That, but that will also vary with the community that you're in. I mean, I guess I could kind of look like my sisters, but in a white bread community, people will be able to look at us and say, yes, you must be so-and-so's sister because you're the only other non-Anglo person here.
Yeah, I guess that would happen.
Yeah,
Oh
which
man.
only works because, in fact, we were sisters.
Well, so I'm going to mention something. If you happen to be out there and you're a person who doesn't have any kids and you really want to get an interesting picture of the kinds of things that sixth graders are able to do, you might want to watch the show called Fetch. Because it was a reality TV show put out by PBS, and it was run by a cartoon dog. And it was a really cute show. And these kids would have to solve all these really complicated puzzles and do things and, you know, mathematical things and build things. And anyway, those kids were always incredibly impressive. So, you know, if you want to have a look at some normal child geniuses, I don't think they were picked out for being geniuses, though. They just had their act together, you know, and they were 12, right?
I was so Fetch with Rough Ruffman, apparently.
Yes, Fetch with Rough.
I was just watching MasterChef Junior, I think it is. It's the kids MasterChef with but it was really interesting because the children very much range in their sophistication and maturity. Part of it is because some of them are as young as 8 and up to, I think, about 12, but part of it was also their individual personalities were very different.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them were very much a sort of classic giggly ants in your pants 8 or 9-year-old who also had a passion for cooking. And some of them were just sort of eerily quiet and calm and composed and having been one of those eerie children, I just looked and went, oh, is that what I look like? But it was an interesting way of getting a really quick look at a certain age range and sort of getting a range.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not it's a skewed sample set because it's the set of children whose parents have enough wherewithal to supply them with the kinds of materials and time to practice gourmet cooking so that they attract the attention of the producers of the show. But even within that, there was this range of how children behave and express themselves.
Well, right. And, you know, I mean, anytime you're looking at a TV show, you're going to be getting a non-representative sample, right?
I think it's really difficult to actually have a small sample that's truly representative. I mean, even if you had some kind of mythical, amazing, 12 kid set that would display the diversity of humanity in interacting with each other, it's kind of a Heisenberg problem, right?
Yes.
So, yeah.
I have, in my current middle grade, I have one kid who seems to have ended up with social anxiety disorder, and she found like this other very monosyllabic boy who she can just whisper to, and he'll interpret for her. He'll talk. He's sort of a go-between for her because she's too afraid to talk to people. He's not afraid to talk to people, but I have him from like this very sort of stoic northern fishing village. So getting more than 2 words out of him, unless he's quoting something, because he has like a million things that start with "my gran says," and then blah blah blah. So unless he's saying that, it's like he just spits out like 1 or 2 words at a time. And then I've got one boy who is sort of ADD and never shuts up. And then my very ambitious main character who is very sensible but very demanding and kind of runs roughshod over her group. And those are the 4 kids in her group. So it's actually been kind of fun to get down how they communicate with each other.
Yeah. That's cool. Wow. I mean, so this is such a huge topic that I find my brain kind of trying to tackle it and going, Ah!
So if I could pick up a thread
Go
that
ahead.
was mentioned earlier about kids looking like their siblings or not looking like their siblings. There's a major trope in fantasy and science fiction literature about kind of the changeling child, an adopted child, or a literal changeling, or someone who was raised not by their genetically related family. And sometimes you have one sibling who is related and another who is not genetically related. Often couples who can't conceive, if they adopt, they suddenly find they can conceive. And so they wind up with a kid who's genetically related to them and one who isn't.
Right.
And so the genre gets so much wrong and so much right with these things.
Yeah.
And so the question of the changeling kind of child is always like, what are the surprises, right? Like, and it's an experiment in genetics versus environment every time.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what does the kid pick up from the family that raised the kid, and what does the kid pick up from, some genetic component that may be wholly unknown to all the characters, right?
There was an interesting article vis-a-vis this, and it was about an accidental baby switch that was discovered. Because of the families doing like a genetic analysis of their genome, sort of.
Sure. Yeah, yeah.
Like a service.
23andMe kind of thing.
Yeah, that kind of service, right? So I can't remember the name of it, but I will try to put it in the report because it was actually really fascinating and talked about that. It got into some of the issues that they had with kind of not fitting in, and
sure.
and also there were a lot of issues that then came up now that they were adults and discovering, in fact, they had this whole other family, that they had this whole other lifestyle, and that they weren't a part of that because of this error. Anyway, it was pretty fascinating, so I'll see if I can find it.
I remember reading an article many years ago, before there were such tests, that they'd figured out a baby switch while the babies were still kids, like they were toddlers. And both families decided to keep the adoptive kid, but they made themselves aware of each other and became part of each other's lives. So, but they all kept the baby they were given because, of course, it was their kid.
By that time, it's your baby. Gosh, what are you going to do?
Yeah,
Right?
Exactly. So I thought that was fascinating. There was also a case I remember reading about where it was in like a Nordic country, and they had done, for fertility reasons, they had used a sperm donor and they'd gotten twins, and the babies came, and one was white and one was black. And the sperm donor was supposed to be the husband, right? But they had gotten somehow the petri dishes messed up a little bit in at least one of the cases, and the parents had two babies that were genetically related to the mother because it was IVF, and one baby that was at least one baby that was not genetically related to the father, in a very visible way. And obviously they kept them both and they loved them and raised them, but it was an interesting case because it was like, the question was, the article was really about like, well, how do you secure these arrangements so that mistakes don't happen in this kind of laboratory? I know when my kids,
I mean, those little bands that they put on babies now, they didn't used to.
Right. I know. Yeah, they do now. They were really paranoid when the twins were born. And when my son was born, right? And the day the twins were born, there was only one other kid in the whole in the ward at the time, and it was a boy. So there was no chance of any confusion because we had two girls and there was one boy, and that was all. There were only three babies, but we had them anyway, and they were very paranoid, and and I loved it, right? And they had like. They actually, the wristbands would beep if you tried to take one of the kids off the floor. Like if you went into the fire.
That's interesting.
Or if you went through the main door of the ward with the baby, an alarm would sound. I thought that was really And the interesting thing about these security measures is, there's no such thing as a security measure that doesn't follow a security breach.
Yeah.
It was,
people steal babies.
yes, that it was an attempt to, the whole movie Raising Arizona is all about that.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, okay, I mean, now we're on babies, and I'm actually glad we're on babies because babies are very often done badly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because I don't know. Here's the thing. I mean, there are such things as easy babies, right? They do exist. I think they're overrepresented in the fiction department.
I think it's because, I mean, a lot of people are like, how do you write in a baby? It's like unless you're writing a tale of motherhood in some way.
Joe
Having
whoa,
an actual
exactly.
like having an actual okay, not just motherhood, but anybody who has to cart around a baby, be it lone wolf and cub, thank you very much, or whatever. But because you're like, how do you get it in? It's almost, I think authors kind of like can and sometimes do treat babies like a prop. Because it's like this other thing that has to be carried around and tended to by the characters, but doesn't have any agency or any lines, and it's almost easy to forget about because it's not a speaking character. But you're like, so what do you do with the baby?
Don't make a baby a prop. I think that's
key
piece of advice number one.
The baby version of a horse is not a motorcycle.
Right, exactly.
I think a thing that is not always taken into, I haven't seen a lot of stories that include babies. Then maybe it's just my memory. Maybe it's
I'm racking my brain.
Okay?
Actually, I think a good depiction in science fiction was Hyperion.
Oh yeah.
I actually thought that was a really good depiction of the baby.
Yeah.
I haven't read those, so
I love the moment.
My bad.
Because this baby is very plot relevant in Lois McMaster's Spoojoled in Barayar, where she's establishing her world, where there is a baby that's being born who one side is trying to kill because they're trying to eliminate the line of succession because she's got a planetary monarchy, and there's a coup in progress, and there's a child that needs to be saved. There is an in utero child whose mother is in hiding, but they're trying to find. And there's also a baby in a uterine replicator. And so we have all of these small children and babies who are central to the plot, who are needing to be dealt with, but also the fact that they are vulnerable and not able to protect themselves, and that the newborn is a newborn, and you can't keep the newborn from crying out and other things, and that moment of fear in the mother about what to do with this child that she's just given birth to, that she's carried for all this time. All of these things are very much this is not a motorcycle horse. This is very much about the reality of what happens in these dangerous situations when you have a child that you need to put into central concern.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then she further explores other things in other stories of hers about genetic mutations and ability of parent to community versus parent to child, and who gets preserved and what order things get done in. So we have this idea that science fiction stories or genre stories are either sword and sorcery or spaceships, but they're people having lives in the midst of all this. So
yeah. Ideally, right?
Well, I'm not going to name names about what kind of people don't like those stories, but
well, so
I might have opinions.
I'm gonna sort of push back a little bit on the Hyperion one. Yes, there was a guy carrying a baby because there was this weird time thing going on, and it was his daughter, and she was aging backwards.
Right.
Okay. And yes, he always had the baby on him. And yes, they did nod to him tending the baby. But that baby was so easy.
Well,
I mean, like, that guy had the easiest time with a 6-week-old baby that I have ever heard of anybody ever having. And like, he's traveling, and the baby's just along.
I'm
Well,
sorry.
I think the baby cries
When the
occasionally,
high
so
point of
that-
your day is you get to take a shower and use the bathroom without worrying about the baby because someone else is managing it, that's a real baby. And I had an easy baby. But there's a thing that parents can do that people who don't have kids might not understand. When I say our baby slept through the night, very young, I mean we got 5 hours at a time of no screaming. I don't mean this baby slept for 7 or 8 hours and we had a normal night. So slept through the night for the parents of newborns can mean something entirely different than
Right.
for what people without kids or people with older kids might expect.
Yeah, and you know what? It's depending on the needs of the child, and obviously kids with special needs are going to be even more intensively demanding. But I mean, my kids, I guess you'd call them intense. They didn't have what people traditionally at this point call special needs, but my son, I remember the first milestone that I noticed in his life came at around 1 month when I started being able to tell the difference between day and night. Because for the first month of his life, he ate for 45 minutes straight every 2 hours.
Oh,
on the
God.
clock.
God.
I had a child
You
like
poor
that,
thing.
and I had a spouse who insisted that I was supposed to be able to be done nursing in 15 minutes and put the baby down and go back to being an ordinary human being. And if I wasn't doing that, then clearly I was just trying to faff around and not do the right thing.
Yeah.
And you know, this kid still, at 10 years old, takes hours to eat because he likes to dissect his food and, you know, come up with new combinations and doesn't want that part and wants that part and wants to augment this part with a thing. And so, yeah, babies don't all come out of the same. And, you know, I was prepared for the same thing with the second one, and she's not like that.
Nope. Nope.
So
So given that I just described the nursing habits of my son, okay, so for the first month there was no day and night. It was just an hour on, an hour off, basically 24 hours a day.
And you just lay there feeling like all you could say was moo.
And occasionally I would sleep for 45 minutes or so. I was such a zombie. But anyway, enough about me. So, but my daughter, right, had a terrible time learning to latch on. Okay. And I never see that talked about. Never see the whole kids have to learn how to nurse thing in a book.
Yeah.
And she would eat every 3 or 4 hours in the morning. And then as the day went by, the feedings would, the amount of time would shrink closer together. And so by the time we reached 7:30 at night, she wanted to eat every half an hour for 10 minutes. I was ready to just die. Right?
Oh, man.
And yeah, so, but they were so different. And they were both really difficult, but in totally different ways.
I want to note that this is about a parenting style that involves being willing to follow the child's pattern.
Yeah.
As opposed to these regimented styles. And I often see the regimented style depicted in fiction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Of, oh, it's X o'clock, I should feed the baby.
Yeah.
And I've had cats that were like that too. Some cats say I need to eat.
I think
And And the one that like wanted to graze all day, and if you have more than one, it becomes a stressor.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
think parents who follow the children's needs and signals for when to eat are sometimes believed to be weak or ineffectual or spoiling their kids.
Insufficiently authoritarian.
Yeah. And
That's the name of my new band, by the way.
Okay.
insufficiently authoritarian.
Insufficiently
Yeah.
authoritarian. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. But it's, and I think that is, well, okay, that's a real world problem. But how do you?
That's a whole other hour. Just
at least.
a whole other hour.
But how do you portray things like? I mean, if you have an actual community and you spend time with other parents and other children, then you have some idea of
So
what your average child is like, what their growth and their development is going to look like. If you are isolated from other parents, other children, then what you've got is probably normal. It's what you expect. You have no way to say this is not as a child should be developing. Is anybody else getting an echo from here?
I'm getting a really bad echo and a buzz.
Yeah, it's coming from Juliet.
Oh dear, because I'm not hearing it.
I'm hearing it, but I'm trying to keep on mute.
Yeah, I've been watching the
I
bars.
heard it and I thought it was me, but then I keep going in and out of that thing.
You know what, Juliet muted herself and now it's gone.
It's gone.
Uh-oh.
That's awkward.
Feedback.
Yeah.
Well,
we'll just carry on, and Juliet will make gestures, and we'll interpret for her.
Is there a second window open, Juliet, somewhere that you're not seeing? Because that might do it.
So while Juliet's trouble checking that, I'm going to go on and talk about Margaret Reed's Archangel. Features some moments where people are critiquing her protagonist's mothering skills because of other character complications about how she's perceived in her community. And so really, rather than depicting other children, Marguerite chose to just have commentary or protagonist awareness of the critique that was happening and how it sort of was of a piece with all the other critique that she was getting socially. So it's one of the ways to deal with how is somebody's parenting being perceived. It reminds me very much of how Bujold managed in discussing expectations of sanity and trauma recovery in Beta versus elsewhere by having Cordelia encountering the expectations of her community and just sort of showing them in place rather than trying to do it by showing somebody else who was seen as sane. We have all these rules about show, don't tell, and I think in our genre it bogs things down when you put these strictures in unnecessarily.
Yeah, sometimes you just have to say, this is what's happening.
Hello? Is that better at all?
Yes.
Yeah, no echo.
No buzz.
No buzz.
Oh, nice. Awesome.
Yeah.
I unplugged my mic and replugged it in, and hopefully that helped.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, yes. So showing people around your protagonist and or their child and or a child protagonist expressing judgment is a very useful way to provide context for such a character and what they're up to.
So I just saw Coco last night with my twins.
Oh, cool.
And that's all about a child protagonist who is, I guess, I guess about 12, I think maybe about 10, 12, something like that. And the family expectations of that child and the child's, the tension between individual and community. And I thought that was a really good portrayal of both childhood point of view and adult point of view. And there was one character, the title character we see as a very, very, very old woman and as a very little girl. So like 3 and like 100, right? We don't see really anything in between. And so that was also kind of interesting. And it's definitely genre because they, on some
go to the land of the dead and all that.
They go to the land of the dead, although in another way, it's not genre at all, right? It's just story. Yeah, so that I think there's something, and the kid was trying to basically figure out what his connection to family really was, right, and what that meant. And so that was, I thought, a very good depiction. I know that the discussion I had with my kids after the movie was also fascinating because I had 2 almost 6-year-olds and they're coming up with their spin on this story. And what it means to them. And one of them asked me, like, she said, Daddy, if you had like 3 wishes, what would you wish for? And I'm like, what? And she realized what she was saying was, what 3 dead people would I meet?
Oh, wow.
If I had my option. And the 2 of them, and she said, and then her sister agreed, that they wanted to talk to their grandfather again, my father-in-law, who died when they were 2. And so that was really interesting. And they talked about, what that was like. It was a pretty, but it was because they're kindergartners, it was a light discussion about really heavy topics because they don't think of it the way grown-ups think of it, right?
Yeah.
It was more like, well, wouldn't it be cool if we could see Grandpa again?
I think that's one of the hardest things about portraying children is being aware of of their environment, what their environment really is, what they see and what they don't see. That as an adult, you have this view of the world, which is very different. It's much broader. You see a lot more.
It's a matter of nuance, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, so
kids pick up on things.
I think, they do, but they're not going to be. They pick up on things, but does a 5-year-old pick up on driving? How? What is it like to drive a car? How is it? What is it like to know what direction you are going in, to have some sense of what things are.
Okay, have you ever driven the wrong way past a thing or gone near a favored treat place with a 5-year-old child?
Yes.
I mean, they're really, really clear. And they're like, no, you need to turn the other way. And like, I need to get to the dry cleaner. And you're going, but McDonald's is over. Who said we were going to McDonald's? I mean, it's there.
Yeah, well, 5-year-old street parents like their horses and a motorcycle.
Because at the age of 22, my kid could still can't do that.
Well, you know what? My kids don't do that either. They just don't care. I think actually I'm really glad we're talking about this, because I think one of the things that is really important to every kind of characterization, but I think very, very relevant to portrayal of children, is the question of what do people pay attention to, right? And there's so much in the world that we may have expectations about what the kid will pay attention to, but the kid may not be paying attention to that. Like I'll ask my kids, when we're in the car somewhere, I'll say, well, do you know where we are right now? And they'll be like, no. Right? Or sometimes they're just now at age 12 and 14, they're starting to go, oh yeah, I know where we are now. But this was never something that they paid attention to. So this is a really good question to ask as you're designing a character. What does this character pay attention to? And is there any reason for it? My husband has this incredible talent for reading the relative social status of every person in a room. And I think it's partly because he was the last of 5 children.
Any situation that makes somebody hyper aware of social dynamics will do that. People who grew up with a lot of trauma, adult children of alcoholics, there are a lot of situations that make people hyper aware of that.
Right.
And we say hyper aware because we've created a baseline that says that that's not a normal level of awareness. But it does happen.
But it doesn't also, I don't think that it also has to happen from trauma either. Like my daughter was like very super aware like of the social interconnections. She wasn't much of a social butterfly herself, but she would stand back and she could see all of the different people, like this person's friends with that person, etc. And it like all 4 of us in the family, she's the only one that really like does that so like really well. We have no idea where it comes from.
Yeah. Well, so my kids don't walk into a room and immediately assess the relative rank of everybody in the room. But one of the things they are really good at, and like unnaturally good at, is knowing when it's safe to swear and when it's not. Bless their hearts. Because they're swearing in our house, right? But they are incredibly good. They, at knowing when it's safe to swear and when it's not. Fantastic, right? I mean, I think I can think of one error that my kids have made collectively between the 2 of them in the 14 years that they have collectively existed on this planet. Which you kind of have to be grateful for that. And what the language that you are speaking influences what you pay attention to. It's something to be aware of. So language influences attention. But one of the things that I'm always talking about when I talk about, it's just something that I talk about constantly when I'm talking about point of view generally, and that is attention and judgment, right? Are really important for grasping what a character is going to do and how they're going to do it. And it's certainly the case for kids. My daughter, when anybody in my house wants to know where something is that they cannot find, they ask my daughter. She just knows where things are. Has since she was 2. And my son, no idea. Oh, where are my pants? Well, I have no idea. Have you checked your room? Yes, I have. Well, they're right here on the back of your chair in your room. You didn't notice them. Nope. Okay. Right. So again, this is one of those things where what people pay attention to and how they evaluate it are very, very different and very important to the way that people navigate the world. So
at least since I got online, one thing we haven't talked about, and I'm just going to sort of wrench the conversation direction. Stop me if you want me to stop. Is in fiction, as fortunately this is not true for most people's lives most of the time, but in fiction, the stressors on a situation, if you have kids, can be quite extreme, like a war or a zombie apocalypse or whatever. And so you're trying to depict your lived experience, hopefully, is one of peacetime and raising children in a relatively stable environment. But you need to depict kids that are under extreme stress at that moment. Like maybe they're really traumatized, like Newt in Aliens, right? Maybe you're really traumatized and they're going to fall apart later, but during the period the story takes place, they're not falling apart. They're just holding it together with whatever coping mechanisms a kid can cobble together.
So what I'm going to say, from having encountered both refugee children who survived as refugees, and also children and parents of intense domestic violence situations, is that children vary in this situation just as much as they do in any other. And some children become very aware of the situation, learn how to shut up and be quiet and compliant and really beautifully cooperative so that they can be rescued. And other children just stress and freak the hell out and make it impossible. And there are always these wrenching stories about parents having to come to a choice about what to do when you have a non-cooperative child who's endangering everybody else. And it's a terrible, terrible wrenching situation. I don't see it written about much in genre. I've seen it written in refugee memoirs. And yeah, that's as much as I want to talk about it right now.
As I said in the sidebar, the last episode of MASH was about that. There's a baby that won't shut up. And if there are people hunting for the civilians, and if they catch the civilians, they're going to kill everyone.
Yeah, you can stop right there, please, Cliff.
Sure.
I think that doesn't need to be.
Yeah, but the point
People can go and look it up if they need to.
Was that it traumatized Hawkeye, and that was what it was all about. And it was a very strong anti-war statement to end the show with. Which, as we all know, is really about the Vietnam War more than the Korean War, given when it was and what it was being written about at the time. But there's a whole bunch of stuff I can't, as a parent, go back and rewatch or reread that I was perfectly fine reading when I was not yet a parent.
Yeah.
By Stephen King, for instance, I could not reread that, and other things. So, but even if you're writing a story, as 100% of my stories have been or will be, where nothing permanently bad happens to children, you still are often in a situation where they're in danger or they're under stress.
Yeah.
And
those situations are amazingly common, and in fact, amazingly common in stories that get G ratings.
Yeah.
And in fact, when my kids were
like Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs,
want to see those films.
Frozen.
They had no problem with PG-13, but they had terrible problems with G because of the types of peril situations that were depicted in them. So
I had a huge problem because my children would not watch anything that depicted parental death. Okay. And that pretty much meant Disney. That they could not be babysat by anybody who wanted to plop them in front of a Disney movie.
Yeah.
Godzilla was not an issue for my 2-year-old. Hansel and Gretel, on the other hand?
Right. Yes. Supernatural monsters are fine.
Coercion by adults is very common. Like The Little Mermaid. has a very coercive situation in it. And then there were other films where, adults are menacing children or otherwise, trying to coerce them. And it's like, really? This is, anybody can watch this.
Yeah, well, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang is rated G, and that's, got the whole, children are illegal.
That shows up in middle grade fiction a lot, though, there's often these adult antagonists who are a menace. And that's not, and again, it's like, not every adult is safe with a child. And that is a thing kids confront. They confront teachers who are like mean or racist. They confront older children, bullies their own age and older. So like it really is like the world is a terrible place, basically. And,
because you have no control over your own life. You have no control over what you eat or when you eat or when you're supposed to sleep or where you're supposed to go.
It's not just that, it's the world isn't safe, really, because, you can have all the control you want, but there's, how are you going to stop that kid who's like 2 feet taller than you from beating the crap out of you?
But that's a lack of control.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
some of this is socialization, because like my children get to control their bedtime. Everybody else thinks I'm completely bananas for doing this, and I'm like, I don't really need my children to have an adversarial relationship with sleep. And this whole, I mean, I absolutely hated being sent to bed at 7 o'clock in California during the summer, where it's still bright for the next 3 hours, and I'd be lying in bed desperately wanting to go to sleep and not allowed to, and I wanted to get up and read or whatever it was. And so I don't think it's actually borne out that it actually creates sleep disorders, but it felt like the same kind of thing as being forced to eat or not eat.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
The other thing that happens is in my kitchen, I try really hard to make sure that there are healthy things that are not just snacks, but substantial food for them to eat during the day. If they're having a growth spurt and I haven't noticed, they get to go and deal with it. Oh, I'd really love to see a growth spurt story in genre, because I haven't.
That is that is definitely a thing. And there's so much more that we could talk about here. Like your thought about growth spurts puts me in mind of these basically growth spurts or developmental spurts that happen throughout a child's life, but on many occasions they're very, very they can be physical growth spurts, or they can be mental growth spurts, or they can be personality growth spurts, and they happen at different points in a child's life. And you're gonna put your toddler to bed one night, and in the morning they could look larger to you, or they could just have their personality turned up by 3 notches the following day.
Changeling stories made so much more sense once I had my own kids. And I'm looking and I'm like, clearly you're still my child, but what happened to the kid I put down to bed last night? You are not that child. Yeah.
And some things happen so
you
suddenly.
You are not that child.
So suddenly.
Overnight. One
day it's like, I can't tie my shoelace, and the very next day it's, Mom, get your hands off. I can tie my own damn shoes.
I've always been able to tie my shoelaces. What do you mean?
I remember
my favorite is when they regress.
Yeah.
And claim that, how could you say that they can tie their shoelaces? Don't you love them?
I remember the day my son, just at like 1.5, decided he was going to feed himself. Like literally every day up until then, he was being fed. And the next day, no, don't feed me, in gestures. And he fed himself from then on, like overnight, one day.
And I think one of the things that I always used to say to myself might be relevant here, which is the only constant is change.
Yeah.
And I think depending on the amount of time that passes in your story, we don't see as much change as we probably should be seeing in kids that, obviously they have plot arcs and everything else, but in a lot of ways, they should be changing more over the course of a story than we actually see them do physically, intellectually, cognitively, socially, etc. So
it depends on how long the story, what period of time the story covers.
Yep.
Right.
And when it occurs, because a lot of these growth spurts can happen really quickly.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
Well, you guys, it's 11:04. I think we could go on for another hour. But this is actually a good start on the topic. So, So thank you all for being here. And next Wednesday, which is the 13th, we have a guest author coming on the show. Rebecca Kwang will be here to talk about her forthcoming novel, which is titled The Poppy War. And I'm really looking forward to speaking with her about it. Maybe she will also tell us about this program that she's a part of. She's actually about to go to England on a special program, and I haven't had a chance to ask her about that. So maybe we'll talk about that on the show as well. In any case, thank you for being here, and I'm going to stop the broadcast.